The sun was a bleeding wound in the west, draining its color onto the vast, bruised sky over Red Hollow. Dust, red and fine as milled flour, settled on everything. It coated the splintered rails of the fences, which leaned at weary angles, surrendering to the relentless prairie wind. That wind was the only thing that moved with purpose. It swept across the endless fields of ripening barley, making them sigh and whisper, a sound like a restless ocean thousands of miles away. This was a place of hard work and harder luck, where life was scraped from the dirt and the law was mostly what a man could enforce with his own 2 hands. In the back of the rattling wagon, Iris Vale kept her eyes on her own lap. She was 19 years old. Her hair, the color of damp straw, had been torn from its pins by the wind, and it whipped across her face, stinging her skin. She clutched a small bundle tied with twine. It was everything she owned. Inside her, everything was pulled tight, a knot of old defenses. The Murrin family had specialized in teaching her how to become small, how to expect little, how to brace for the casual cruelty that came as easily as breathing. Her hidden hope, a thing she barely dared to name, was just to find a place where she could stand upright and not be struck, a place to own her own breath. The man driving the wagon, Clyde Marin, started to whistle. It was a thin, tuneless sound that scraped against the evening quiet. He had a slick, handsome face that always looked like it was smiling at a private, dirty joke. To Iris, his smile always smelled of trouble. He saw people as pieces on a board, things to be moved or traded. He was deep in debt, that much she knew, and he held his claim over her, his distant relation, like a deed to a property he was eager to unload. The wagon groaned to a halt. Ahead, a man stood waiting by a sagging barn. He was broad, his shoulders straining the fabric of his worn shirt. He was as still as the cottonwood tree that stood silhouetted on the rise behind him. This was Abram Thorne, a widower, a farmer. His face was a map of sun and wind, the lines etched deep. He was a quiet man, hollowed out by a grief Iris knew nothing about, a fire that had stolen his wife and child years ago. His purpose now was simple: to keep the land, to work until he was too tired to remember, and not to let the ghosts of what he had lost pull him under the earth with them. Clyde jumped down, his boots kicking up red puffs. He called out, his voice full of false cheer, that he had arrived, and he had the payment. Abram Thorne moved slowly, deliberately. His steps were heavy on the packed earth. He did not look at Iris. He stopped a few feet from Clyde, his shadow stretching long and dark between them. Clyde gestured with a thumb back toward Iris. 19, he said, a good worker, and quiet. He was selling her like a mule. The wind filled the silence. Abram's eyes, the color of a winter sky, stayed fixed on Clyde. Then his voice, rough as burlap, came out. He asked where the horse was. A flash of triumph lit Clyde's face. He said the animal was in the back, under the tarp. He complained that it had cost him good money to track her down. Abram walked past Clyde. As he passed the wagon, Iris caught his scent. It was clean sweat, leather, and dust, not whiskey. That was one small mercy. He went to the back of the wagon and pulled aside the heavy canvas sheet. Beneath it stood a pale Palomino mare, Lark. Iris watched Abram Thorne's back. His shoulders went rigid. He reached out a hand, rough and calloused, and laid it on the horse's muzzle. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He was not just looking at a horse. He was looking at a memory, a piece of a life that had burned down. This horse, Iris sensed, had belonged to his wife. The transaction suddenly felt heavier, weighted with sacrilege. Clyde, seeing his advantage, rubbed his hands together. A horse for a girl, he announced. A fair trade. Lark was not yours to find. Marin, Abram said, his voice dangerously low. Possession, Clyde countered, his smile widening. The law is thin out here. I had her. Now, you have her. And, he added, nodding to Iris, you have her. Abram looked at Clyde for a long time. The prairie seemed to hold its breath. This was the law of Red Hollow. Happening right here. This was the bargain. Iris felt her stomach tighten. She knew how these things went. She was the coin. You are in debt, Abram said. It was not a question. Clyde's smile faltered for a second. A man has obligations. My stepfather has needs. The mention of the older Marin, the source of her misery, made Iris shrink further. Get your tack off my horse, Abram said. He turned his back on Clyde. A profound insult. He looked at Iris. His gaze did not linger on her face or her form. It just landed, heavy and tired. The house is there, he said, pointing with his chin. Wait on the porch. It was a command, but it was not cruel. It was flat, empty. Iris scrambled down from the wagon, clutching her bundle. She hurried to the small, splintered porch, her boots sinking into the red dust. She sat on her bundle, her back to the two men. She did not want to watch the final handover. She listened. She heard the jingle of harness, the soft stamp of a hoof. She heard Clyde curse under his breath. Then, the sound of Abram's heavy boots leading the horse away. The great barn door groaned on its hinges. A moment later, Clyde's wagon creaked as he climbed back aboard. He did not whistle this time. The wagon rattled away, fading into the dusk, leaving Iris alone on the porch of her new life. She waited. The sky turned from purple to a deep, starless black. The wind grew teeth, and she shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter. She was property. She had been traded for a horse that the man clearly valued more than any human. The barn door squealed again. The heavy footsteps returned. Abram Thorne stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was just a tall, broad shape in the darkness. Are you hungry? He asked. Iris nodded, then realized he could not see her. Yes, sir, she whispered. He went inside. The front door hinge cried out. A match scraped, and yellow lantern light bloomed inside the dark house. He did not invite her in. He came back out a moment later, holding a tin plate and a cup. He set them on the porch planks by her feet. There was a hunk of dark bread and a few strips of dried meat. There is a room, he said, gesturing with his head to the door. First one you come to. It has a cot. He turned without another word and walked back toward the barn. The lantern swinging by his side. He was going to spend the night in the barn, with the horse. Iris ate. The bread was hard, but it was food. The water was cool and clean. When she was done, she stood and slowly pushed the front door open. The house was one main room and a few smaller ones off it. It smelled of cold ashes, old dust, and a sadness so deep it felt like a physical chill. Her eyes went to the fireplace. The hearth was black, the stones cold. On the mantel, half hidden in the shadows, sat a small object. She crept closer. It was a little wooden horse, carved by a simple knife. One of its legs and half its mane were blackened, charred from a fire. A cold dread touched her spine. The story was true. Fire, loss. She backed away and found the room he had spoken of. It was little more than a closet with a window, a narrow cot, a single thin blanket. She sat, but did not lie down. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and waited. She was used to waiting. She waited for the door to open, for the heavy footstep, for the demand. It was all she had ever known from men. But the footstep never came. The only sound was the wind, crying around the corners of the house. She must have dozed, sitting up, because the gray light of dawn startled her. She heard movement outside, the scrape of a bucket. The front door opened. Abram Thorne stood there, holding a pail. He had already been working. He wore the same weary expression. He saw her, poised on the cot like a cornered animal, and he stopped. He seemed to understand. He looked down at the floorboards for a moment, gathering his words. The pump is out back, he said, his voice thick. "We have coffee first, then chores. If you take coffee—" He paused, shifting the bucket. He had to set the terms. She had to know them. "Clyde Marin," he said, "is a snake. That transaction—" It was not right, but it is done. Iris braced herself. Here it came. The rules. "But you listen to me," he said, and he met her eyes. His were clear and tired and held no meanness. "I bought the horse. He threw you in to spite me. I do not own you." She could only stare. This was a language she did not know. He looked away, toward the open door and the graying land. "You work, you eat, you want to leave, you can walk. I will not stop you. We do not keep prisoners here." He turned and left, his boots heavy on the porch. Iris stayed frozen on the cot. The wind blew through the open doorway, carrying the smell of dust and the faint promise of morning. She took a breath. It felt strange in her lungs, sharp and painful. It was the first breath she had ever taken that felt like it belonged entirely to her. It was a terrifying, fragile thing, a seed of hope cracking open in the frozen, dark ground of her fear. That first night, Iris sat on the narrow cot, a thin blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, and listened to the prairie try to tear the house down. It was not a moan. It was a shriek. A sandstorm had risen with the dark, and the wind hammered the wooden walls, flinging grit against the single window pane with a sound like 1,000 tiny claws. The house groaned in reply, the timbers straining. Every sound was a ghost of a sound she already knew. The scrape of a branch on the roof was the sound of a boot in the hall. The slam of the wind against the door was the sound of a hand striking wood. Just before it struck flesh, she was 19 years old and had been traded for a horse. Now she was in the house of the man who had made the trade, and he was sleeping in the barn. She waited. This was the part she knew. The waiting. At the Marin house, waiting was a weapon. You waited for Clyde to finish his whiskey. You waited for his stepfather, Harlan, to tire of his complaints. You waited for the inevitable moment when the world's frustrations found their focus. And that focus was usually her. He had said, "We do not keep prisoners here." He had said, "You can walk." She looked at the rattling window. Walk where? Out into that screaming, black, abrasive ocean of sand. He had given her a choice that was not a choice. She was his. The question turned over and over in her mind. A smooth, cold stone. Am I a piece of property, or am I a person Clyde had set the price? This man, this silent, broad farmer, had paid it. He had bought the horse, and she was the bitter extra. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small, a skill she had perfected. The cot was hard beneath her, but it was a bed. It was in a room. It had a door. She listened for the hinge. It never creaked. She must have slept, for the sound of the wind had died, replaced by a cold, gray light. The storm was over. She sat up, her body stiff, every nerve alert. She had woken before dawn. An animal instinct. She heard the metallic complaint of the pump handle, a rhythmic squeak and splash. He was already up. Iris stood, smoothed her dress, and repinned her hair with trembling fingers. She was a worker. She knew her place. She would earn the bread and dried meat he had left her. She pushed open her door and stepped into the main room. The house was colder than the night had been. The central hearth was still a black, dead hole. But in the corner, a cast-iron cook-stove was radiating a low, steady warmth. Abram Thorne stood by it, his back to her, pouring coffee from a blue enamel pot into a tin cup. He heard her. He did not turn, but he picked up a second cup and filled it. He placed it on the rough-hewn table. She crept forward. He took his own cup and went to the open front door, looking out at the scoured, clean world. The red dust was gone, replaced by a damp, brown calm. She took the cup. It was hot, scalding her fingers. She sipped. The coffee was black, bitter, and strong. It burned a line of warmth down to her stomach. He came back inside, setting his cup down. He did not look at her. He spoke to the air between them. The chickens need seeing to. The coop is behind the barn. The eggs are for the house. After that, we check the south fence line. The storm might have loosened the posts." His voice was flat. A simple list of facts. Not a request, not a command, just the shape of the day. "Yes, sir," she whispered. He finally looked at her. His eyes were gray, clear, and held nothing but a deep, settled weariness. "My name is Abram," he said, "just Abram." He picked up a coil of rope and a heavy hammer and went back outside. Iris let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She drank the rest of the coffee, the heat spreading through her. She found a bonnet hanging by the door, put it on, and went out into the new day. The work was the first true thing. The chickens clucked, small, stupid, and alive. She found 3 eggs. The pump handle was heavy, but the water that came up was cold and sweet. She carried buckets, her shoulders straining, but the pain was clean. It was the pain of effort, not of malice. She found him at the south fence. He was resetting a post, his muscles bunching as he slammed the heavy mallet down. She stood, unsure. He pointed to the next post. "Check if it is loose." She went, grabbing the wooden post and shaking it. It wobbled in the damp earth. He grunted. He finished his own, then came to hers. He did not tell her to move. He just worked, tamping the earth, driving wedges. He handed her the mallet. "Hold this." She held it. He worked. When he was done, he took it back. They moved down the line like that for hours. It was a silent partnership. At midday, the sun was high and warm. He stopped, wiping his brow with his sleeve. He sat on the ground, leaning against a solid post. He unslung a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. He drank, long and deep, then held the canteen out to her. She hesitated. It was his. He gave it a small shake. Impatient. "Drink." She took it, her fingers brushing his. She drank. The water was still cool. He unwrapped the bundle. It held the same dark bread and hard cheese as the night before. He broke the loaf in half. He broke the cheese in half. He handed her one of each. The portions were equal. She sat a few feet away, her back to a different post, and ate. The silence was not the threatening silence of the Marin house. It was a wide, empty silence, filled with the wind in the barley and the cry of a hawk overhead. He did not ask her about her journey. He did not ask her about her family. He did not ask what she could do. He just ate, his eyes on the horizon. This simple respect, this granting of space and sustenance, was more foreign to her than any language. It undid her. She found herself watching him, his large, rough hands, the way the sun had bleached the hair on his arms. He was a man of simple, heavy movements. Nothing was wasted. When he was done, he stood, wrapped the cloth, and tied the canteen to his belt. "We finished the line," he said. Days fell into this rhythm. Dawn, coffee, chores, silence, dusk, food, and the retreat to their separate rooms. He still slept in the barn. She found out why a few days later. She was in the small, cluttered storage shed adjacent to the barn, looking for fresh sacking to patch a grain bag. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the open door, on a high shelf, tucked behind a rusted harness. She saw it. The little wooden horse. She had seen it on the mantel that first night. He must have moved it out here, unable to bear the sight of it in the house. She reached up, her fingers tracing the simple lines. It was carved with a loving, unsteady hand, a child's hand. One leg and half the mane were blackened. The wood bubbled and charred. She heard a footstep behind her. The light from the door vanished, blocked by his wide frame. Iris flinched, spinning around. The toy horse was still in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the old terror rising. She was cornered. She had been caught touching what was not hers. I was just looking for sacking," she stammered, holding her other hand up as if to ward off a blow. He did not move. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were fixed on the horse in her hand. She expected him to yell, to backhand her for prying. His voice, when it came, was not angry. It was thick, choked with something she did not recognize. "Put it down." She placed it gently back on the shelf, next to the harness. He stared at the toy. Not at her. The silence stretched, becoming heavier than the air before a storm. "The boy carved it," Abram said, his voice so low she almost did not hear it. "My son, he liked horses." He said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his boots heavy in the dust. Iris leaned against the shelf, her knees weak. She understood the cold hearth, the barn, the suffocating stillness of the house. It was not a house. It was a tomb. The fire that had taken his family was still burning in that fireplace, and he would not go near it. He had shared the key to his grief, and she felt the weight of it pressed down on her. A week later, she had to fetch water from the creek a mile south. The one he said had the sweet water, not the alkali taste from the pump. As she entered the cottonwoods that shaded the bank, she saw another woman kneeling by the water, filling a bucket. The woman looked up. She was older, her face a web of deep lines, her hair a mix of gray and black pulled back in a tight braid. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and missed nothing. Iris stopped, clutching her own bucket. "You must be the girl from Thorne's place," the woman said. Her voice was dry, like rustling leaves. Iris nodded, unsure if she should approach. The woman stood, lifting her bucket with an ease that belied her age. "I am Mara Doone. I live on the ridge." She studied Iris, her gaze traveling from her worn boots to her wary eyes. "I am Iris Vale." Mara nodded slowly. "I know. Heard Clyde Marin was in town, bragging on his trade." Iris flushed, the shame washing over her. She looked at the ground. He traded. Mara finished for her. I know. Clyde Marin is hog waste. Always has been." She stepped closer, and Iris had to fight the urge to step back. Mara looked into her face. "A price tag is not a soul." "Child," Mara said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Do not let what a fool like Clyde thinks you are worth have any truck with what you are. They are not in the same language." Iris looked up, startled by the echo of her own thoughts. "Abram Thorne is a good man," Mara continued. "He is broken, but the pieces are all good. You be good to him. He has had enough bad." She turned and walked away. As silent as she had appeared, Iris watched her go, the words settling in her mind. A price tag is not a soul. On Sunday, Abram hitched the old wagon. "We need supplies," he said. Town was a scattering of false front buildings baking in the sun. A general store, a saloon, a small white church, and a few houses. As they pulled up, Iris saw Reverend Hollis, a thin, kind-eyed man, sweeping the church steps. He paused and nodded, his gaze gentle. "Mr. Thorne, ma'am," he offered Iris a small, welcoming smile, a gesture of public decency that felt revolutionary. Sheriff Avery, a large man with a thick mustache and a star pinned to his vest, was standing outside the saloon. He watched them, his eyes missing nothing. He touched the brim of his hat toward Abram. His gaze lingered on Iris, assessing, before drifting to the horses hitched at the rail. Iris saw the familiar paint horse among them. Clyde was here. Abram went into the general store. "Stay with the wagon," he said. Iris waited, her hands clutching her lap. The bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open, and, for a heart-stopping second, she thought Clyde was coming out. But it was Dr. Elias Wynne, a man with tired eyes and a black bag. He saw her, paused, and tipped his hat. "Miss," he said. He seemed to want to say more, but just nodded. "You know where my office is, if you ever have need." She nodded, mute. These men, the reverend, the sheriff, the doctor, they formed a different kind of fence line. They were the community, the order that stood against the chaos of men like Clyde. When Abram came out, His face was tight. He loaded the sacks of flour and salt, his movements quick and angry. She heard two men talking as they passed the wagon. "Saw Marin in there, running his mouth. Says Thorne cheated him. Says he is going to get what he is owed. More than just a horse this time." The threat was real. It was here, in the saloon, drinking and getting louder. The ride back was silent, the wagon wheels grinding in the ruts. The air was tense. That night, she saw him cleaning his shotgun by the lantern light in the barn. A few nights later, a cold snap hit. The wind was sharp, and the house felt brittle. Abram came in from the barn, rubbing his hands together. He had been mending a harness by lantern light, and his sleeve had caught on a hook, tearing it from the cuff nearly to the elbow. He pulled the heavy shirt off, tossing it onto a chair. He was wearing a simple undershirt, and she saw the play of muscles in his back as he moved to the wash basin. He plunged his hands and arms into the cold water, scrubbing off the grease and grime. Iris looked at the torn shirt. It was a good shirt, just torn. At the Marin house, she would have been ordered to fix it, and likely slapped if the stitches were not small enough. She looked at him. His back was to her. He was humming, a low, tuneless sound, lost in his own thoughts. She made a choice. Quietly, she stood and picked up the shirt. She took her small sewing kit from her bundle. It was the one thing she owned that Harlan had never bothered to take. She threaded a needle, her fingers quick and sure. He stopped humming. He stopped scrubbing. He turned, water dripping from his elbows onto the floorboards. He watched her. She did not look up. She sat, spread the rough fabric across her lap, and began to stitch. Her hands were steady. She aligned the fabric, her stitches small, neat, and strong. She was not just mending the cloth. She was mending something else, something in the cold, silent room. It was the first voluntary act she had taken since her arrival, a small, quiet claim on her own existence. She finished the seam, knotted the thread, and bit it clean with her teeth. She stood and held the shirt out to him. She did not raise her eyes, staring instead at the floor between them. He was still for a long moment. Then he reached out and took it. His calloused fingers brushed her hand. It was the first time they had touched. The contact was brief, accidental, but it shot through her like a spark. He looked at the neat, strong line of stitches. He ran his thumb over the seam. He cleared his throat. "Good," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed in her chest like a warm stone. It was not praise, it was acknowledgement. It was the first thread. The small act of mending, of stitches laid in a straight, strong line, had shifted something in the cold air of the house. It was a single thread, but it was a thread. The silence between Iris and Abram was still vast, but it was no longer empty. It now held the memory of a shared, unspoken acknowledgement. He wore the mended shirt. He had not mentioned it again, but the dark blue thread was there, visible on his arm as he worked. For 3 days, a heavy, oppressive calm settled over Red Hollow. The air grew thick, humid, and still. The sun was a white-hot coin in a sky the color of dirty brass. The wind, usually a constant, restless voice, had died completely. The barley fields stood motionless, their heads heavy, waiting. It was the silence of a held breath. Iris felt it in her skin, a crawling tension. She had seen skies like this before, in the flatlands with the Marins. It was a sky that promised violence. Abram felt it too. He worked with a grim, hurried intensity. He checked the barn roof, hammered loose shingles. He reinforced the door of the chicken coop. He moved with a restless energy, his eyes constantly scanning the bruised, yellowish-green horizon. He spoke little, but his orders were clipped and precise. "Bring in more wood." All of it. "Fill every bucket from the pump. Fill the basin. There is a storm coming. A bad one." Iris did as she was told, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. She carried load after load of wood, stacking it by the cook stove. Not the dead hearth, She worked the pump handle until her shoulders screamed. The rhythmic squeak and splash, the only sound in the suffocating stillness. The house was hot, the air unbreathable. The storm broke just before dusk. It did not begin with rain. It began with a sound, a low, guttural growl from the west that seemed to come from the earth itself. Then the sky split open. A single, jagged fork of lightning struck the ridge, and the world went white. The thunderclap that followed was instantaneous, a physical blow that shook the house to its foundations. And then the wind came. It struck the small house like a fist. The walls groaned. The windows rattled so hard Iris thought the glass would shatter. The sky opened, and the rain did not fall. It was driven, a horizontal wall of water that blurred the world into a gray, roaring chaos. Iris stood by the window, her hands pressed to her mouth. This was not a storm. This was a war. Nature itself was trying to tear down the world. Where was Abram? She saw him through the streaming pane, a dark shape struggling across the yard, head down, fighting his way toward the barn. He was trying to get to the animals. To Lark. The wind screamed, a high, thin note like a woman in terror. The house shuddered. He is not coming back in, she thought, panic rising. He went to the barn. He is sleeping there, but this is different. She watched the barn, a dark, solid shape against the screaming gray. The rain was so thick she could barely see it. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the yard. He was not there. He must have made it inside. She waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The storm intensified. The wind shifted, and now it was hitting the house from the north, a new, more savage assault. She heard a crack and a crash. A tree, somewhere close. The old fears rose up, choking her. Chaos, violence, the sounds of things breaking. She wanted to crawl back to her cot, to hide, to make herself small. But a new fear was stronger. It was a picture. Abram, in the barn, the wind tearing at the roof. The barn was old, older than the house. She thought of the little charred horse, of fire, and now this. She went to the door, pulled it open a crack. The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it wide open against the interior wall. Rain and wind exploded into the house, scattering papers, guttering the lantern. She did not care. She held onto the doorframe and peered out. I thought you were hurt, she whispered, the words lost in the roar. She saw him. He was not at the barn. He was fighting with the main pasture gate, which had been ripped from one hinge and was threatening to break free. Releasing the 2 draft horses into the maelstrom, he was trying to rope it shut. He was a fool, a brave, stubborn fool. She did not think. She pulled her thin shawl over her head, a useless gesture, and ran from the porch. The moment she left the shelter of the house, the storm seized her. The mud was a living, sucking thing, pulling at her boots. The rain was not water. It was ice, needles of it, driven by a wind so strong she could not breathe against it. It stole her breath, plastered her hair across her eyes, blinded her. Her shawl was ripped from her head in an instant, a dark rag swallowed by the gray. She stumbled, fell to one knee, the mud soaking her dress. She pushed herself up, gasping. Abram, she screamed. But the wind tore the name from her mouth and flung it away. She could not see him, just the roaring, blurred shapes of the yard. She aimed for the barn, knowing he must have given up on the gate. She ran, her lungs burning. She reached the barn, her hands fumbling for the great door. She pulled. It would not budge. The wind held it shut. She threw her whole body against it, and it scraped open just enough for her to slip inside. She collapsed against the inner wall, gasping for air. The barn was chaos. It was not dark. Lightning flashed continuously, strobing through the cracks in the walls. The air was filled with the terrified whinnies of the horses and the lowing of the milk cow. Hay dust swirled in the electric air. Abram. He was there. He was at the far end, by the great loft door. It had blown inward, and the wind and rain were pouring in, tearing at the hay. He was shoving his shoulder against the massive wooden panel, trying to force it closed against the gale. He was losing. He is going to be crushed, she thought. She ran toward him, scrambling over bales of hay. Abram. He heard her. He turned his head, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted fury. Iris, what in the name of God are you doing? Get out. He roared it, but he did not move from the door. I came to help. Just as she reached him, a massive gust hit. The door flew backward, smashing Abram against the wall. He grunted in pain. The heavy bar, the one meant to secure the door, swung free and crashed against his arm. He swore, a low, harsh sound. Iris, get back to the house now. I will not. She grabbed the door with him, adding her meager weight to his. The wind was a solid, moving thing, a giant animal trying to get in. Push, he yelled. They pushed together, he with his shoulder, she with her hands. The door moved an inch, then another. The wind howled, fighting them. Now he roared. With a final, desperate heave, they slammed it shut. Abram, with his good arm, fumbled for the bar, his breath sobbing in his chest. He could not lift it. The bar, he yelled. Iris saw it, the heavy beam of wood. She grabbed it, adrenaline giving her a strength she did not know she had. She lifted it, grunting with the effort. He guided it with his good hand, and it fell into the heavy iron brackets with a deafening final thud. Silence. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, distant. The only sounds were the panicked animals and the two of them, panting in the strobing dark. Abram leaned against the door, his head bowed. He was favoring his left arm. You are a fool, he breathed. A complete fool, girl. He turned to her. She was soaked to the skin, her dress hanging in heavy, muddy folds. Her hair was a wild, streaming mess. She was shaking, not from cold, but from terror. He looked at her, and the anger drained from his face, replaced by something she could not name. He did not speak. He shrugged out of his heavy canvas coat. It was damp, but the woolen lining was dry. He wrapped it around her shoulders. It was huge. It enveloped her, heavy and warm, smelling of him, of leather and clean sweat and the electric smell of the storm. You should not have come, he said again, his voice rough. I thought the wind, I thought you, she stammered. I saw you at the gate. He just looked at her. He was holding his left arm against his body. You are hurt. It is nothing. The bar hit it. It is fine. He slid down the wall, sitting on a low hay bale. He gestured to the one opposite. We waited out. We cannot go back in that. She sat, pulling the enormous coat tighter. It was the warmest she had ever been. She was safe. The wind was outside. The violence was outside. Inside, in the dark, with the scent of hay and the quiet breathing of the animals. She was safe. They sat in the dark. The lightning flashes grew less frequent. The thunder rolled, now a distant grumble. The rain turned from a roar to a steady, heavy drum on the roof. A single flash, bright and white, lit the yard through a high crack in the boards. For a fraction of a second, Iris saw the world outside, the mangled gate, the scoured earth, and on the ridge, a shape, a man on a horse, sitting still, watching the farm. The image was burned into her mind before the darkness snapped back. It was not the storm. It was not a tree. It was a man. Clyde. She shivered. A deep, cold tremor that had nothing to do with the rain. Abram saw it. You are cold. We should go back. The storm had passed over. The worst was done. He stood, testing his arm. He winced. They made their way to the door. He pulled the bar, and they slipped out into the night. The world was a sodden, broken mess, but it was quiet. The rain was a steady, cold drizzle. They half ran, half walked through the thick mud, their boots making sucking sounds. They burst into the house. It was a tomb. The lantern was out. The air was freezing, damp. and smelled of the wet ash from the cook stove. Iris was shaking again. Violently, her teeth chattered. Abram looked at her, her small, pale face, her lips blue. He looked at the dead cook stove. Then his gaze moved to the main hearth, the cold, black hole in the center of the room, the memorial. She watched him. His face was tight, his jaw set. He was having a battle with himself. He made a decision. He went to the woodpile she had stacked, his movements stiff, almost angry. He grabbed an armload of kindling. He knelt before the dead hearth. His hands, the hands that had fought the storm, were shaking. He laid the wood. He struck a match. The small flame wavered. Iris held her breath. This was more than a fire. This was a resurrection. The kindling caught. A small, hungry flame licked the wood. He added a larger log, then another. The fire grew, orange and yellow, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. It pushed back the cold. It pushed back the dark. It pushed back the ghosts. He dragged the heavy bench from the wall, placing it near the fire. "Sit," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Get dry." She sat, still wrapped in his coat. The heat washed over her, real and wonderful. He took the blanket from her cot and hung it over a chair, steaming in the warmth. He sat on the floor, on the other side of the hearth, leaning his back against the wall. He stared into the flames, his left arm resting on his knee. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the crackle and pop of the logs and the steady, gentle drumming of the rain on the roof. "The anger is gone," Iris whispered. "Meaning the storm." He kept his eyes on the fire. "This land," he said, his voice quiet. "It is not kind. It is not kind to people who care about things. It finds what you love, and it takes it." Iris looked at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the deep sadness in his eyes. She thought of the charred toy. She thought of him fighting for the gate. She thought of the horse, Lark. She thought of the way he had wrapped his coat around her. "And yet you still care," she said, her voice just as quiet. He turned his head slowly. He looked at her. The firelight was dancing in her eyes. He saw her. Not the trade, not the girl. He saw the person who had run into the storm for him. He did not answer. He did not need to. He had given his answer when he lit the fire. He held her gaze for a long moment, an unspoken promise passing between them. Protection. He would act before he spoke. The warmth, the exhaustion, the release from terror. It was too much. Her eyelids grew heavy. She slumped on the bench, his coat a heavy, safe cocoon. She fell asleep by the warm, living fire. She woke to the smell of coffee. Gray light was streaming through the clean windows. The rain had stopped. The air was fresh, cool, and new. She was on the bench. His coat was gone. The blanket from her cot was tucked around her. Abram saw her. A small smile touched his lips. He nodded toward the window. "It is a good day," he said, for mending what broke. Iris stood, clutching her warm cup, and watched him walk outside. The air in the house was clear. A season had turned, not just in the world, but inside the small, quiet room. The fear was still there, a cold shadow on the ridge. But for the first time in her life, it was not the only thing. There was also the fire, and the man who had lit it. The storm had scrubbed the world clean, and in its wake, something new had settled. The fire in the main hearth was no longer a monument. It was a fact. Abram lit it every evening before dusk, the quiet crackle of the logs chasing the cold shadows from the corners of the room. He had not slept in the barn since that night. He had wordlessly taken the simple cot in the main room, leaving her the privacy of her small bedroom. The house was his again, and he was no longer just its guardian, but its resident. This new, fragile peace changed the air between them. The silence, once a heavy, empty space, was now just quiet. It was the quiet of work, of shared tasks. They mended the pasture gate together, the one the storm had nearly torn from its hinges. He showed her how to brace the post, how to wrap the wire. His instructions were simple, direct. Pull it tighter, like this. No, put your weight into it. She did. The wire bit into her hands, but she held it. He hammered the staple home. He stopped, looking at the mended gate. It was solid. He nodded. Once. Good work, he said. That will hold. The two words landed in her chest like warm coins. She had never been told she had done good work. She had only been told when she had failed. She found herself standing a little straighter. Life fell into a rhythm, marked by the sun, not by fear. In the evenings, Iris cooked. The cook stove was her domain, and she found a small measure of pride in it. One evening, she was stirring a pot of thin rabbit stew, trying to make it last. She was humming, a tiny, tuneless sound she used to make at the Marin house. It was a sound to make herself disappear, to build a small wall of noise against the world. She heard him stop. He was at the table, mending a piece of harness, the leather smelling of oil and work. She froze, her hand gripping the spoon. She was making noise. He did not look up. His hands, large and rough, continued to work the awl and thread. If you have a song, he said, his voice quiet, you should sing it proper. This house has been quiet long enough. Iris felt a flush creep up her neck. It was not a reprimand. It was permission. It was an invitation. She swallowed, her throat dry. She tried. A small, thin thread of a melody came out, an old hymn about a river. Her voice was rusty, unused. It wavered, and she stopped again. He glanced up, his gray eyes unreadable in the firelight. It is a good sound, he said, and he went back to his work. The next night, she hummed again, and the night after that, she sang the words. Her voice grew a little stronger. It was the sound of a living thing cautiously testing the air. The trust built, not in words, but in deeds. When they worked the far fields, he passed her the canteen first. When he repaired a section of the barn roof, he trusted her to hold the ladder steady. These were small, daily affirmations that she was not a burden, not property. It was just work, and they were in it together. One afternoon, a few weeks after the storm, she was in the barn. The day was warm, and the air was sweet with the smell of hay. She had gone to fetch new sacking, but she found herself standing by Lark's stall. The Palomino mare was the reason she was here, the price that had been paid. The horse nickered softly, pushing her velvet nose into Iris's hand. Iris stroked the mare's broad face, her fingers tracing the white blaze. You are a good horse, she whispered, a gentle girl. The horse leaned into her touch, her large, dark eyes soft. She always was. Abram's voice startled her. He was standing at the entrance to the stall, his shadow falling long in the afternoon light. He was not angry. He was watching her, his face quiet. He walked in, standing beside her. He ran his own hand down Lark's powerful neck. Iris felt she should step away, that she was intruding on a private moment. She was yours, Iris said, her voice barely audible. Before. Abram nodded, his gaze fixed on the horse. She was Mary's, my wife's, Mary. She raised this horse from a foal. She loved this contrary pale creature more than anything, save the boy. He was quiet for a long time, his hand moving in a slow, rhythmic stroke. The fire. Lark was in the far pasture that night. She was safe. Everything else. The house, the old barn, the boy, and Mary. It all went. When it was done, this horse was the only living thing I had left of them. She was the last piece of my wife. Iris could not breathe. She finally understood. When Clyde Marin showed up in town, bragging that he had tracked her down, that he had her, it was like he was digging them up, spitting on their graves. And then, his jaw tightened. He stopped stroking the horse. And then he put you in the wagon. He made you part of his, His dirty trade. It was his way of poisoning the one good thing I had left. He turned his head, his gray eyes meeting hers. I bought the horse back. Iris, I never meant to buy you. I know, she whispered, her hand still resting on Lark's cheek. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the girl who had run into the storm, the woman who sang softly by his fire, the hands that mended his shirt. I am glad the horse is home, he said, his voice rough. And I am not sorry you are here. It was the most he had ever said. It was everything. It was the connection, the line drawn from his dead wife to her, the living woman, not as a replacement, but as two people touched by the same story, the same horse, the same loss. The next trip to town felt different. Iris sat on the wagon seat beside him, not in the back. As they pulled up to the general store, Reverend Hollis was coming out. He stopped, his kind face lighting with a genuine smile. Mr. Thorne. And he looked at Iris. It is good to see you. Miss, a good day after all that rain. He included her. He spoke to her directly as a person, not an attachment. Good day, Reverend. Iris found herself replying. Sheriff Avery was standing on the boardwalk, watching the street. He was a broad, watchful man, his presence a heavy weight. He nodded to Abram. Thorne. His eyes moved to Iris. The last time, his gaze had been sharp, suspicious. Now, it was just assessing. He saw her, sitting on the wagon seat. He saw Abram, loading sacks. He saw the mended shirt Abram wore. He touched the brim of his hat. Ma'am. It was a simple courtesy. It was a public acknowledgement. It meant everything. As they were leaving, they saw Mara Doone loading supplies into a mule-drawn cart. She stopped, her dark eyes taking them in. She looked at Iris, a long, appraising look. You are still here, she said. It was not a question. Iris nodded. Good, Mara said. That house needs a living soul in it. She tied off her rope, then looked back at Abram. Her face was serious. You keep your eyes sharp. Abram, that snake Clyde Marin is still rattling. He was in the saloon 2 nights ago, running his mouth. He is full of whiskey and bad notions. Abram finished loading the last sack. His face was grim. I know. He said. The ride home was quiet, but the air was charged. The fragile peace had been given a deadline. It came 2 days later. They were in the yard. Iris was hanging laundry on the line she had strung between the house and a cottonwood sapling. Abram was splitting wood. The rhythmic thwack of the axe, a steady heartbeat. A single rider. They both froze. The thwack stopped. The rider was coming fast. It was Clyde Marin. He pulled his horse up just outside the mended gate, kicking up a cloud of red dust. He was drunk. Not sloppy, but the sharp, vicious kind of drunk. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with malice. Abram dropped the axe. He walked slowly toward the gate, his boots heavy on the packed earth. He stopped just inside his property line, putting himself between Clyde and Iris. What do you want, Marin? Clyde's lips peeled back in the smile that always smelled of trouble. Just checking on my investment, Thorne. Or, I guess I should say your investment. His eyes slid past Abram, fastening on Iris. He looked her up and down, a slow, insolent appraisal that made her skin crawl. She felt naked, priced. You keeping her warm, Thorne, he called out, his voice loud. Meant to carry, or is she still just cold property? She looks a little fuller. You feeding her good. What is the price on a night with her? I figure I already paid for her once. Seems I should get a family discount. Iris felt the blood drain from her face. Abram did not speak. He did not yell. He moved. It was not a rush. It was a deliberate, heavy glide. He unlatched the gate, swung it open, and was on Clyde before the other man could react. He did not go for a gun. With one hand, he seized the horse's bridle, yanking its head down. With the other, he grabbed Clyde's shirt front and tore him from the saddle. Clyde hit the ground with a sickening, dusty thud. He gasped, the wind knocked out of him. Abram stood over him. He was shaking, his whole body rigid with a cold, pure rage Iris had never seen. He did not say a word. He drew back his fist. It was not a brawl. It was a sentence. He hit Clyde once, a solid, heavy punch that landed on his jaw with the sound of a wet plank breaking. Clyde screamed, a high, thin sound. He rolled over, clutching his face, spitting blood and something white into the red dust. Abram stood over him, panting, his knuckles split and bleeding. "This is my land," Abram said, his voice low, shaking with the force of his control. He pointed to the house. "That is my house." He turned his head and looked at Iris, who was standing by the porch, her hands pressed to her mouth, her heart hammering. He pointed at her. "She is not property. She is under my protection. You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. You will not ride on this land again." The declaration hung in the bright, still air. Clyde scrambled backward, crab-walking in the dirt like a broken spider. He was terrified, but his hate was stronger than his fear. He got to his feet, holding his shattered jaw. You broke my face," he spat, blood running down his chin. "This is not over. Thorn, this is not over by a long shot." He pointed a shaking finger at Abram, then at Iris. "I got papers. You hear me? She is kin. Harlan Price gave me the papers. I am her legal guardian. I will be back. I will be back with the law. And if the law ain't enough, I will be back with kin who are—" He staggered to his horse, hauled himself into the saddle, and galloped away, a broken, furious shape vanishing over the rise. The silence that fell was heavier than before. Abram stood at the gate, his chest heaving. The adrenaline drained away, leaving him pale. He looked at his own hand, at the blood dripping from his knuckles onto the land he had just defended. Iris ran to him. "Abram, your hand—" He looked at her, his eyes dark with the violence he had just committed. He turned without a word, went to the pump, and began to wash the blood and dirt from his skin. That night, Iris woke to a sound, a chair scraping on the porch. She got up from her cot. The fire in the hearth was low, just glowing embers. The house door, the one to the porch, was open a crack. It was not barred. The house was alive, breathing the cool night air. She looked through the opening. He was there, sitting in the old chair, his shotgun resting across his knees. He was staring out into the darkness, watching the road, waiting. She knew he had not slept. She went to him, a small, quiet shadow. She stood beside his chair. The vast, starry sky seemed to wheel above them. "You should sleep," she whispered. "He will be back," he said, his voice flat. She shivered. "He said, kin. He means Harlan Price, your stepfather. They are cut from the same rotten cloth." The name, Harlan, sent a spike of pure ice through her. Harlan was worse than Clyde, colder, meaner. She looked at Abram, this quiet, broken man who had just declared her under his protection. "That night in the barn," she said, her voice so low it was almost part of the wind. "During the storm, I thought you were all alone." He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the dark ridge. "You are not alone anymore. Abram." She said it as a simple fact, a truth she had just learned. She reached out. She did not touch his shoulder or his face. She touched his wounded hand, the one that had defended her. It was resting on the shotgun stock. Her fingers were small and cool, gently tracing the split, swollen knuckles. It was not a caress, it was an anchor. He did not pull away. He did not flinch. For a long moment, he sat rigid. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over, his calloused, rough palm brushing hers. A silent, binding promise, I know. The cold shadow of Clyde Marin's threat had become a permanent resident in the house. It sat at the table with them. It watched them from the fields. The shotgun was its physical form. Abram had cleaned it with a slow, meticulous care. It was not for rabbits. It was for waiting. He hung it on the 2 new wooden pegs driven into the wall by the front door. It was the first thing Iris saw when she came out of her room in the morning, and the last thing she saw as the fire burned low at night. It was a heavy, silent promise. But the shadow, as dark as it was, could not stop the light. Life had to go on. It had to be lived, even while waiting. And so, a new rhythm began. One of a fragile domesticity, a partnership forged under threat. They did not speak of what was coming. They spoke of the winter wheat, of the loose shingle on the barn roof, of the need for more lamp oil. Love, Iris was learning, did not always speak in soft words. Sometimes it spoke in deeds, small, rough, and practical. One morning, she was reaching for the high shelf where she kept the dried herbs. Her dress, her only dress, was old and thin. The fabric at her shoulder, worn from scrubbing and lifting, finally gave way. It was not a tear, but a slow unraveling of the main seam. She felt the cool air on her skin and stopped. A small gasp of despair. It was just a seam, but it felt like she was coming apart. Abram was at the table, mending a heavy leather strap, his hands powerful and sure. He saw her stop. He saw her try to pinch the fabric together, her face pale with frustration. He said nothing. He simply put down his awl, stood up, and went to his workbench. He came back not with her sewing kit, but with a thick, curved needle and a spool of heavy, waxed thread meant for leather and canvas. He gestured to the stool. "Sit," he said. She sat, her back to him, her shoulders hunched in embarrassment. She expected him to hand her the needle. Instead, she felt his large, calloused fingers on her shoulder, gathering the torn fabric. His touch was impersonal, focused, like a carpenter on a piece of wood. She sat perfectly still. She could feel the warmth of his hand through the thin cotton. He did not try to be gentle. He was efficient. He punched the heavy needle through the fabric, his movements quick and strong. He was not mending the dress. He was reinforcing it. His stitches were not small or neat, like hers would have been. They were large, robust, and unapologetic. They were stitches that would hold. He finished, knotted the thread with a sharp tug, and tapped her on the other shoulder. "Done," he said. She stood and touched the seam. It was a thick, raised ridge, but it was solid. It would never tear again. He had already gone back to his harness, as if nothing had happened. He treated her in this way. When the north wind came down from the plains, carrying the first real bite of winter, they were checking fence posts on the high ridge. Her thin shawl was useless, and she shivered, her hands turning blue as she held the wire stretcher. Abram, working in the mended shirt, stopped. He watched her for a long moment, his jaw tight. He swore, a low sound directed at the wind itself. He unbuttoned his shirt. "Abram, no," she said, her teeth chattering. "You cannot. It is too cold." "I am warmer," he said. It was a lie, but it was also a command. He pulled the thick wool shirt off, leaving himself in his thin undershirt. The wind hit his bare arms, and he did not flinch. He tossed the shirt to her. "Put it on." "I will not," she said, though she was shaking. "Do not be a fool, Iris," he said, his voice rough. "I cannot work and watch you freeze. Put it on." She did. She pulled the heavy shirt on over her dress. It was huge. It fell to her knees, and the sleeves covered her hands. But it was wonderfully warm, and it smelled of him, of clean sweat and wood smoke. He turned back to the fence, his bare arms exposed, and began hammering, the muscles in his back moving with a fierce, steady rhythm. He was willing to be cold so she could be warm. This was his language. He never said a sweet word. He never offered a soft touch, but he shared his last piece of bread. He fixed what was broken. He gave her his own warmth. He had been teaching her to ride Lark. It was a practical decision. "You need to be able to move," he had said, his face grim. Not just walk. But Mary's saddle was old, the leather stiff and cracked. It had been built for a different rider, and it fit Iris badly. After an hour of riding, a deep ache would settle in her lower back. She never complained. She would just walk stiffly for an hour afterward, rubbing her side when she thought he was not looking. He noticed. He always noticed. One evening, the work was done. The sun was setting, and the light that poured through the open barn door was the color of liquid gold. It caught the dust motes dancing in the air, turning the barn into a hazy, quiet cathedral. Iris was brushing Lark down, her movements slow with fatigue. The ache in her back was a dull, throtching pain. Abram came in. He was not carrying a feed bucket. He was carrying something new, something wrapped in brown paper. He went to the saddle rack. "You are done for the day?" he asked. "Yes, I think Lark is glad of it. I'm not a gentle rider." "You ride well," he said. "The saddle is wrong. It is hard." She just shrugged. "It is a good saddle. It is strong." "No," he said, his voice flat. "It is not." He took the saddle down from the rack. He tore the paper from the object he was carrying. Iris gasped. It was a new sheepskin liner, thick and soft in the color of fresh cream. It was a luxury she could not even comprehend, something she had only seen in the windows of the finest shops in the county seat. "Abram," she whispered. "You cannot. That must have cost a fortune." "Riding," he said, cutting her off, his voice firm as he tied the new liner to the saddle. "Should not hurt you." He finished tying the leather thongs, his large, rough hands surprisingly deft. He smoothed the soft wool with his palm. "This will be better, softer for your back." He put the saddle, transformed, back on the rack. Iris stared at it. The golden light hit the white wool, making it almost glow. She reached out and touched it. It was softer than anything she had ever owned. This was what it meant. Sold for a horse, but he treated her like gold. It was not gold coins. It was not pretty jewels. It was a mended seam. It was the shirt from his back. It was this thick, soft sheepskin, bought with scarce money, all to ease a pain she had never even spoken of. He had seen, and he had acted. He stepped back, giving her space. He did not touch her. He did not wait for thanks. He just gave her the gift and turned to fill the water trough. He still slept on the cot in the main room, his presence a wall of safety. Not a threat. The distance he kept was the greatest respect she had ever known. That night, they sat on the porch. The air was cold, the sky a vast, velvet black, studded with diamonds. The shotgun was just inside the open door, a long shadow. The quiet of the prairie was so deep it seemed to hum. "Abram?" Iris said, her voice small, but clear in the stillness. He turned his head. He had been watching the dark ridge line. "I need to say something," she said. "I know. I know what Clyde said in town, that he has papers, that he is my kin, my guardian." Abram's body went rigid. "He is a liar." "I know," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "But that is not it. I do not want you to think. I am not here because he left me here. I am not here because you made that trade. I am not a debt. I am not a prisoner." He looked at her fully, his gray eyes unreadable in the starlight. "I am staying," she said, the words coming out stronger now, a truth she had just realized. "I am staying because I want to. This is the first place I have ever felt real. I am staying because I choose to stay." It was a vow. She was not a piece of property, moved from one owner to another. She was a person, making a choice. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. The world seemed to stop. Then he nodded. Once, a slow, grave acknowledgement. "I know," he said, and she knew that he did. The choice made the threat more terrible, because now she had everything to lose. Their next trip to town was a heavy, necessary burden. The air in Red Hollow was thick with whispers. As they walked to the general store, she saw women stop talking and turn away. The men in front of the saloon watched them, their faces blank. Clyde had been sowing his seeds, and the crop was suspicion. Sheriff Avery met them on the boardwalk. He was not wearing his hat. He looked tired. "Abram, Iris," he said, his voice low. He was making a point to use her name. "It is getting worse. Marin and his stepfather, Harlan Price, they were here again. They did not just go to the county seat. They filed papers with the circuit judge." Abram's face was stone. Avery rubbed his face, his frustration clear. "They are claiming guardianship. They are claiming you, Abram, are holding her against her will. They are painting you as a man of low morals, and they are painting Iris as stolen." "She is a free woman," Abram said, his voice a low, cold rumble. "She stays by her choice." "I know that," Avery said, his voice cracking with exasperation. "But the law out here, Abram, it is a tangled, ugly thing. Papers signed by a blood relation, Harlan Price. They look real. And the judges knew. They are not just using paper. They are gathering men. They are telling folks they are coming to rescue her." "Let them come," Abram said. "That is what I am afraid of," the sheriff said, his eyes bleak. "That is exactly what I am afraid of. Be watchful. They are not just blowing smoke." The ride home was dead silent, the wagon wheels grinding in the ruts. The threat was no longer a shadow. It was a man, with papers and a gun. That night, the house felt small, the shotgun by the door inadequate. Abram did not sit on the porch. He sat at the table by the fire, the lantern light low. He was carving. He had been working on it for weeks, in small, stolen moments, always putting it away when she came near. Tonight, he did not. He was carving a small, flat disc of cottonwood. The wood was pale and smooth. His large, rough hands were surprisingly gentle, the small knife blade flashing as it peeled away thin slivers of wood. He was not carving a horse. He was carving a wild prairie rose. Its petals unfolded. He finished. He sanded it with a piece of worn harness leather until it was as smooth as river stone. He had drilled a small hole in it and looped it with a simple leather thong. He did not get up. He did not make a show of it. He just slid it across the rough wood of the table to her. She picked it up. It was light, but it felt heavy and warm in her hand. It was beautiful. It was simple. It was perfect. It was another piece of gold. Not bought. It was made for her. She looked up at him. He was watching her, his face weary in the firelight, but his eyes clear and steady. There was no passion in his look. It was something deeper, something more solid. It was a look of fact, a look of acknowledgement. He was not looking at a trade. He was not looking at a burden. He was not looking at the girl who had cost him his wife's horse. He was looking at her, Iris. She slipped the thong over her head. The small, wooden rose lay against her skin, beneath her dress, warm and secret. She was not an item. She was not property. In this house, with this man, she was family. And that, she knew, was a thing he would fight for. The wooden rose, tucked beneath her dress, was a small, secret warmth against her skin. It was a constant reminder of what was at stake. The shotgun, hanging by the door, was the public one. These two objects defined their lives. They lived in the small, quiet space between a private promise and a public threat. The waiting was the worst part. It was a poison. It seeped into the bread they baked, the water they drank, the silence between them. Every time the wind rose, they would both stop, listening. Every time a hawk cried out, their heads would lift, scanning the ridgeline. Abram grew leaner, the muscles in his jaw constantly tight. He was not sleeping. Iris knew it. She would wake in the deep, black hours of the night and hear the faint scrape of his boots on the porch floor. He was there, sitting in the chair, the shotgun across his lap, watching, waiting for the dust to rise. It rose on a Tuesday. The sun was low, beginning its long, bloody death in the west. The light was thick and golden, the color of honey and old amber. It made the air heavy. Iris was on the porch, shaking out a small rag rug. Abram was at the woodpile, splitting the last of the logs for the night. The thwack of his axe was a comfort, the only sound in the deep, evening quiet. Then he stopped, mid-swing. He did not turn. He just went perfectly still, his head tilted. Iris heard it too. It was not the wind. It was not a lone rider. It was the heavy, rhythmic drumming of multiple horses, coming fast. Abram dropped the axe. He moved, not with the panicked speed of a hunted man, but with the grim, deliberate economy of a man going to a job he hated. "Get in the house, Iris," he said. His voice was flat. All the life bled out of it. She did not move. "Get in the house," he said again, his voice harder. "Bar the door." He turned and strode to the porch, his boots heavy on the planks. He took the shotgun from its pegs. He checked the load, his movements practiced and sure. "Abram," she whispered, her hands gripping the porch rail. "Do as I say, now." She ran inside, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She pushed the heavy oaken bar into its brackets. She ran to her small window, the one that looked out over the yard. 3 riders. They pulled up just outside the mended gate, the one he had defended with his fists, the one they had mended together. The low sun was at their backs, turning them into tall, black, featureless silhouettes. The dust they had kicked up swirled around them, lit like golden smoke. So Clyde Marin was in the center. His face was swollen and discolored, his jaw set at an unnatural angle. He was flanked by 2 men she did not know. One was a tall, thin man with a red kerchief tied around his throat. The other wore a long, pale duster, despite the warmth of the evening. They both had rifles in their saddle scabbards, and holsters tied low on their hips. Abram stood on the porch, the shotgun held loosely, its muzzle pointed at the ground. He was 20 yards from them, an eternity. "This is my last warning. Marin," Abram called out, his voice clear and steady in the quiet air. "You are not welcome. Ride away." Clyde laughed, a thick, ugly sound. He had a piece of paper in his hand. He waved it. "I am not here to talk. Thorne, I am here for my property. I have got the law this time. A paper. From the judge. It says Iris Vale is my ward, my kin, and you are holding her." "Property," Abram said. His voice was dangerously soft. The man in the duster unlooped the rawhide thong from his pistol hammer. "The law says she comes with me." Clyde spat. "I am here to retrieve what is mine." "She is not yours," Abram said. "I am tired of this," Clyde said. He nodded to the man with the red kerchief. "Get her." The man smiled, a thin, cruel expression. He swung his leg, dismounting. He took 1 step toward the gate. "This is your last chance," Abram said. "Step off this land." The tall man with the kerchief laughed. He kept walking. He put his hand on the gate latch. His other hand moved, a blur, dropping toward the gun on his hip. The sound of the shotgun blast was a deafening, echoing roar that shattered the evening. It was so loud, it seemed to suck all the air from the world. The tall man did not make a sound. He was thrown backward, as if by a giant, invisible hand. He crumpled to the ground by the gate and did not move again. For a heartbeat, there was a terrible, ringing silence. The man in the duster reacted. He was fast. He dove from his horse, rolling behind the meager cover of the water trough. A pistol was in his hand. He fired. The bullet cracked past Abram's head. So close Iris heard the air split. The second shot was not aimed at Abram. It was aimed at the house, at the window. "No!" Iris screamed, just as the wood of the porch railing beside her exploded in a spray of white splinters. She felt one sting her cheek. Abram did not fire back. He moved. He threw the shotgun onto the porch and launched himself at her. He was not a man, he was a force. He hit her, not with a blow, but with a tackle, his shoulder catching her in the stomach. He wrapped his arms around her as they fell, twisting his body so he landed on the hard porch planks beneath her. His weight was a crushing, solid shield. She was pinned, her face pressed into his chest. She could smell the gunpowder and the sweat on his shirt. She could feel his heart hammering against her own. A third shot rang out. The bullet buried itself in the wall above their heads. Abram moved, rolling off her. He grabbed the shotgun. He rose to one knee, a large, lethal target, and fired the second barrel. The blast was directed at the water trough. The metal screamed. The man in the duster cried out, a sharp, thin sound of pain. Clyde, who had sat frozen on his horse, finally broke. He was a coward. He never meant for this. He had meant for his men to do the work. He yanked his horse's head around, digging his heels in. Abram was already on his feet, breaking open the shotgun, his hands moving with a speed Iris could not follow. He shoved 2 new shells in. He snapped it shut. He raised it, not at the fleeing man in the duster, but at Clyde. He did not fire to kill. He fired at the horse, but in his haste, the shot went wide. A spray of pellets caught Clyde in the shoulder and back. Clyde shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure terror. He clutched his arm, blood welling dark on his shirt. He and the second gunman, who was now clutching his own arm, galloped away, vanishing back into the red dust they had come from. Clyde's voice, thin and full of hate, drifted back on the wind. This is not over, Thorn. I will be back. I will be back. With papers and with Harlan. Then they were gone. The silence that fell was worse than the noise. It was thick, ringing, and smelled of sulfur and death. A man was dead at their gate. Iris was still on the porch, her hands pressed to the splintered wood. Her cheek was bleeding from a small wood chip. Abram stood, the shotgun still hot in his hands. He was panting, not from effort, but from adrenaline. He looked at the body by the gate. He looked at the blood spreading in the red dust. He turned to Iris. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dark. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. She shook her head. "No." She pointed to his arm. There was a long, bloody graze on his forearm where a splinter had raked him. "It is nothing," he said. He sat down. Suddenly, he sat on the porch steps, put the shotgun beside him, and buried his face in his hands. He was shaking, not from fear, from the reaction, from the thing he had been forced to do. Iris came and sat beside him. She did not touch him. She just sat, a small, solid presence in the wreckage. The sound of another horse, this one coming at a steady, non-threatening pace, made them both jolt. Sheriff Avery, he pulled up, his horse shying at the smell of blood. His face was grim. He looked at the body. He looked at the splinters on the porch. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at the 2 of them, sitting side by side. Mara Doone was right, he said, his voice heavy. He looked at Abram. "He rode in to warn you. I was right behind him. We were too late." Abram raised his head. His face was blank, empty. He said they came for her. He said they had papers. "They are liars," the sheriff said. "I checked with the circuit judge. He issued no such paper. They were here to take her, Abram, by force." He dismounted. He walked over and looked down at the dead man. He nudged him with his boot. A hired gun, from up in the territory. Worthless. He looked back at Abram. This was self-defense. "Abram, plain as day. You were protecting your home. Protecting her." Abram just nodded. The sheriff sighed. He looked at the setting sun. It was almost dark. "It is a hell of a mess," he said. "But the law is on your side, for what that is worth." He looked at the body. "I will take him, but I cannot do it tonight. I will be back with a wagon in the morning." Abram made a decision. No, he said, his voice quiet. "He died on my land. I will bury him." The sheriff studied him. "That is a heavy thing. Abram stood. "It is my burden." The sheriff nodded. He understood. This was the code. You took responsibility for the life you took, even if it was justified. "All right," he said. "I will make the report." He looked at them both, his eyes full of a weary sympathy. "They will be back. Harlan Price is not a man to let this go. You know that." "I know," Abram said. The sheriff mounted his horse and rode away, leaving them alone with the dusk and the dead. A light, cold drizzle began to fall. It was not a storm. It was a weeping. The drops hit the porch, turning the dust and the few spots of blood into a thin, pinkish mud. Abram went to the barn. He came back with a shovel. He did not ask Iris to help. He walked to the far side of the yard, to the massive, ancient cottonwood tree on the rise, the one that watched over the house, the one that held the memories of his wife and son. Iris watched from the porch as he began to dig. The sound of the shovel biting into the earth was a rhythmic, awful sound. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. It was dark. The rain was steady now. She lit the lantern and carried it out to him. She did not hold it for him. She hung it on a low branch, its yellow light making the raindrops glitter like tears. She went back to the house. She got a bucket of water from the pump and a stiff brush. She knelt on the porch, where his body had covered hers. She began to scrub the small, dark stains from the wood. She scrubbed until her hands were raw, but the rain was washing it faster than she could. He came back an hour later. He was soaked to the skin, covered in mud. He leaned the shovel against the house. He did not look at her. He just stood on the porch, his head bowed, and let the rain wash the dirt from him. Iris went to him. She stood in front of him, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his wet clothes. He looked at her. His face was a ruin of grief and exhaustion. "I was afraid," she whispered, her voice shaking so hard she could barely speak. He nodded. "I know." "No," she said, and she reached out, her small, trembling hand grabbing the front of his wet shirt. She fisted the material, holding on to him. She looked up, her eyes bright with tears she would not shed. "I was not afraid of the guns. Abram, I was not afraid of them. I was afraid for you. I was so afraid. I was so afraid they would take you from me." It was the simplest, truest thing she had ever said. It was a confession. It was not a declaration of love in soft words. It was a declaration of fact, spoken in the raw terror of almost losing him. He looked down at her, at this small, fierce woman clinging to his shirt. He raised his hand, the one that was not scraped, and slowly, gently, he laid it on top of hers. He covered her hand with his, pressing it to his chest. He said nothing. He just stood there with her in the rain, holding her hand against his heart, while the water washed the last of the blood from the porch, leaving only the dark, wet stains. The grave under the cottonwood tree was a fresh scar, an angry, mounded line in the earth. The rain had washed away the blood, but it had not washed away the memory. The man who had died at their gate was a ghost now, one more to join the others that haunted the farm. But this ghost was different. It was a promise. It was the physical proof that Clyde Marin and Harlan Price would return. Autumn bled its color from the land, leaving the world brown and brittle. The days grew short, the nights cold and sharp. The quiet that settled over the small house was not peace. It was the heavy, breathless silence of a loaded gun. Abram was a man possessed. He worked from before dawn until well after dusk, his movements driven by a grim, furious energy. He mended, he built, he reinforced. He replaced the porch plank that had been splintered by the bullet. He built a new, stronger bar for the front door. He sharpened his axe, his knives, his scythe. He was turning the small farm into a fortress, his body a bulwark against the coming storm. And he waited. Iris waited with him. The bond between them, forged in the terror of the gunfight and sealed by her confession in the rain, was no longer fragile. It was a fact. It was as solid as the hearth, as real as the shotgun by the door. After that night, the pretense of their separate sleeping quarters had fallen away. There was no discussion. He had simply taken the blanket from his cot and laid it on hers. His presence beside her in the small room, a profound comfort, a wall of warmth and safety against the night. Theirs was not a romance of soft words, but a partnership of survival. They were two halves of a whole, waiting for the world to try and tear them apart. Then, one morning, Iris woke to a world transformed. It was silent, a deep, profound, muffled silence. She sat up, pushing the heavy blankets back. Snow. It had fallen in the night, a thick, clean blanket that covered everything. It covered the yard. It covered the broken water trough. It covered the grave under the cottonwood, smoothing the angry scar, making it look peaceful. The world was white, pure, and still. But the snow was not a comfort. It was a trap. It made the house an island, isolated and exposed. It meant that travel was difficult, that escape was impossible. And it meant that any man who came would leave tracks. The cold settled in, sharp and biting. And with it, something new began inside Iris. It started as a simple wave of dizziness. She was hanging the laundry, the wet sheets freezing stiff in her hands. When the white world suddenly tilted, she gripped the clothesline, her head swimming, until the spell passed. She blamed the cold. A few days later, it was a sudden, violent nausea in the morning. She barely made it to the porch, her body rebelling against the simple smell of coffee. Abram, seeing her pale face, thought she had taken a chill. He made her sit by the fire, wrapping a blanket around her. He was rough, but his concern was a tangible thing. Iris knew it was not a chill. She began to count the days, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. She had been late before, when food was scarce at the Marin house, her body too starved to be regular. But this was different. This was not a week. This was 2, 3, 4. A new terror, entirely separate from Clyde Marin, took root. She was 19 years old. She had been bartered like an animal. Harlan Price, her stepfather, had spent years telling her she was worthless, broken, a barren, empty thing. He had said it so many times. She had believed it. His words were a brand on her soul. And now, this was impossible. A new life, here, now, with a war on their doorstep. She felt a surge of panic, a desire to run, followed by a fierce, protective instinct that was as animal as it was new. She felt ashamed. How could she bring this new complication to Abram? How could she burden him with one more thing to defend? She hid it. For 2 weeks, she fought the morning sickness, swallowing it down, her knuckles white as she gripped the sink. She ate her food, even when it tasted like ash. But the changes were real. A new, strange tenderness, a weariness that went bone deep. She could not hide it forever. She had to know. She remembered the doctor in town. Not Dr. Elias Wynne, but another one. A woman. She had seen her once, coming out of the general store, a practical, kind-faced woman with a black bag. She had to ask Abram to take her to town. He was in the barn, reinforcing the main door with iron straps he had bought on their last trip. The sound of his hammer was loud in the cold, still air. "Abram," she said, her voice small. He stopped, turning. I need to go to town. We are low on salt, and I need thread. For mending." He looked at her, his gray eyes sharp, assessing. The trip to town was a risk. It was a 2-hour ride. Exposed, on the open road, he hated leaving the farm undefended. His gaze softened as he took in her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes. He thought it was the waiting, the fear. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "We will go tomorrow." The ride was an agony of tension. The world was a blinding white. The sky a low, metallic gray. The wagon wheels crunched in the packed snow. Abram sat beside her, the shotgun resting across his lap, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, the dark lines of the trees, the breaks in the hills. Every shadow was an ambush. But Iris saw something else, on the far ridge, the one he always watched. She saw it, a dark speck, a horseman, sitting still, watching them. She grabbed Abram's arm. He nodded, his face grim. "I see him." He did not stop. He did not speed up. He just kept the wagon moving at its steady, deliberate pace. The rider did not follow. He just watched, a silent, cold observer. Clyde. When they reached the town, it was huddled against the cold, chimneys pouring gray smoke into the gray air. Abram pulled up at the general store. "I will get the supplies," he said. "You wait here." "No," Iris said, her voice trembling, but firm. I have an errand. I will not be long." He looked at her, surprised. He opened his mouth to argue, to tell her it was not safe, but he saw the look in her eyes. It was not fear. It was a desperate, brittle resolve. He nodded. "Do not be long. I will be here." She slipped down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the dirty, churned snow of the street. She walked, her head down, to the small, neat house with the polished brass plaque. "Dr. Annabelle Shaw." She raised a trembling hand and knocked. The door opened. The doctor was an older woman, her hair pulled back in a severe gray bun, but her eyes were quick and kind. She wore a clean, starched apron. "Yes, child." I need to... I think I am unwell," Iris stammered. Dr. Shaw looked at her, her gaze missing nothing. She saw the paleness, the way her hand instinctively went to her stomach. She stepped back. Come in out of the cold." The office was warm. It smelled of carbolic soap, dried herbs, and coffee. It was the safest room Iris had ever been in. "Now," the doctor said, her voice gentle, but practical. "Tell me what is wrong." Iris told her. "The dizziness, the sickness, the lateness." She spoke in a whisper, her eyes fixed on her own hands, twisting in her lap. Dr. Shaw listened. She did not interrupt. She just nodded. When Iris was finished, the doctor asked a few simple, direct questions. She was not judgmental. She was not shocked. She was a professional. She had Iris lie down on the small cot, her hand gentle but firm as she examined her. Iris lay there, rigid, her eyes shut tight, waiting for the verdict, waiting for the shame. Dr. Shaw was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a soft, kind voice, "Well, my dear, you are not unwell. Not at all." Iris opened her eyes. "Harlan Price, my stepfather, he said I was broken. He said I was empty." Dr. Shaw's kind face hardened for a fraction of a second. "Harlan Price is a brute and a fool. Men like that use words like weapons to make others small. They know nothing." She placed her warm hand on Iris's stomach. "You are not broken, child, and you are certainly not empty. You are as healthy as can be. You are going to have a baby." The words hit Iris like a physical blow. She stared at the ceiling. "A baby? From what I can tell," she continued, "you are about 8 weeks along. Everything feels strong and right." Iris did not know what to feel. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, fierce, impossible joy. It was true. It was real. Harlan was wrong. She was not broken. She was full of life. She left the doctor's office in a daze, clutching a small pamphlet of advice. The snow-covered street seemed impossibly bright. The world was not gray. It was white and new. Abram was waiting, the wagon loaded. He was standing by the horses, his body tense, the shotgun in his hand. He saw her, and the tension drained from him. Are you "I am all right," she said, her voice quiet. She climbed onto the wagon seat. The ride home was silent. Iris held the secret in her heart. A small, warm coal. The dark speck was gone from the ridge. That night, the house was warm, the fire roaring in the hearth. The snow had started to fall again, a gentle, quiet curtain that sealed them in. Abram sat at the table, the lantern light falling on his hands. He was carving. She had seen him working on it for weeks, in the deep, quiet hours of the night when he thought she was asleep. He was carving a block of pale pine wood. It was a cradle. It was simple, solid, and beautiful. The sides were smooth, the rockers perfectly curved. He was working on the headboard, carving the same simple prairie rose he had carved for her. He was building for a future he did not dare speak of. Iris stood, her heart so full she thought it would break. She went to him. He stopped carving, the small knife still in his hand. "Abram." He looked up, his face weary in the golden light. She did not speak. She could not find the words. She reached out and took his hand, the large, rough hand that had fought for her, that held the knife. She gently uncurled his fingers. He let her. He watched her, his eyes full of a deep, questioning tenderness. She lifted his hand. She turned it, palm down, and she placed it, flat and warm, against her own stomach. He froze. His entire body went rigid. His hand was huge, covering her. He could feel nothing, just the rough wool of her dress. But he understood. He looked from his hand to her face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Iris." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of fear. They were tears of pure, unbridled fact. "I saw Dr. Shaw. She whispered. She said it is true. About 8 weeks. His hand trembled. He did not pull it away. He spread his fingers, as if trying to feel the impossible. He stood up, slowly. He was a tall man, and he towered over her. His other hand, the one holding the knife, set it down carefully on the table. He raised that hand. He touched her face, his thumb catching a tear, his calloused skin rough against her cheek. He looked at her, and his eyes, his gray, weary, ghost-filled eyes, were undone. The walls he had built, the grief he had carried, it all just fell away. He saw her. He saw the child. He saw a life he thought had been burned to ashes. He leaned down. His lips were chapped, his face rough from the wind. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of pure, stunned, trembling reverence. It was a promise. It was a seal. It was the first real kiss of her life, and it tasted of wood smoke, coffee, and salt. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. He was shaking. "A baby," he whispered, the word an echo, a prayer. They stood like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the snow falling outside, his hand resting on the new life between them. Later, they sat by the fire, the finished, unassembled pieces of the cradle on the table. He touched the smooth pine. "We will need it," he said. "Soon." Iris smiled, her hand resting on her stomach. "It needs a name," she said, her voice soft. Abram looked into the flames. I am not good at names." Iris thought of the darkness they had come through, the fear, the blood, the cold, and she thought of this impossible, warm, living secret. "Hope," she whispered. Abram turned, his face illuminated by the fire. "Hope." He smiled. It was the first time she had ever truly seen him smile. It transformed his face, chasing the ghosts away. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "That is a good name, a strong name. Hope. Hope." The name was a seed they had planted in the frozen earth, a stubborn, impossible belief in a spring that might never come. The small, unassembled cradle sat in the corner, its pale pine a promise of a future they were building with their bare, trembling hands. The kiss had changed everything. It had taken their partnership of survival and forged it into a family. The snow that had sealed them in was no longer a gentle blanket. It was the white wall of a prison. The love that now lived openly in the small house made the threat on the horizon unbearable. They were no longer two broken people, clinging to each other for warmth. They were a unit. They had a future. They had hope. And that made them infinitely more vulnerable. The watcher on the ridge had been real. They both knew it. Clyde was out there, nursing his broken jaw and his bottomless spite. The silence of the snow-covered prairie was a lie. It was a held breath. The breath broke on a Tuesday. A hammering came at the door, loud and frantic. Not the stealthy approach of an enemy, but the desperate arrival of a friend. Abram, who had been oiling the shotgun by the fire, was on his feet in an instant, the gun leveled at the door. Iris, her heart leaping into her throat, hand on her stomach, cried out, "Who is it?" "It is Mara Maraduni. Open the door." Abram, quickly. He slid the new, heavy bar back. The door flew open, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air. Mara Doone stood there, her face raw from the wind, her black and gray hair wild. She was not on her mule. She had ridden a horse, ridden it hard. It stood behind her, its flanks heaving, dark with sweat even in the freezing air. "Get inside," Abram said, pulling her in. "There is no time," she panted, her dark eyes wide with a fear Iris had never seen in her. "They are here. They are moving." "Clyde," Abram said. It was not a question. "Yes, but not just Clyde." Mara gripped his arm, her fingers biting like talons. "He did it, Abram. He brought him Harlan Price." The name hit Iris like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Harlan, the man who had owned her, the man who had... She could not form the thoughts. The cold, dead eyes, the smell of his cheap whiskey, the casual, smiling cruelty, the source of all her old, dark pain. He was here. "Harlan," she whispered. The room tilted. Abram caught her, his arm a steel band around her waist. He did not look at her. His eyes were locked on Mara, his face transformed into a mask of cold, lethal rage. "Where?" he said, his voice a low growl. "They are holed up at the old Sumter place, the one that burned down 5 years back. The stone chimney is still standing. They are using it for cover." "I saw the smoke," Mara said, her words tumbling out. "I was checking my traps. I saw them ride in, 6 of them, Clyde, Harlan, and 4 hired guns. They are drinking. I heard them. They are waiting for dark." "They will come here." Iris breathed, her terror a cold, paralyzing thing. They will burn us out." "Yes," Mara said, her face grim. "That is the plan." Harlan was bragging. "He said he would finish what your fire started. Abram, he said he would smoke you out and take the girl and the farm." The ghosts of his wife and son, the smell of smoke and burning flesh, rose in the room. Abram's hand, the one on Iris's waist, clenched so hard she winced. "No," Abram said. "Abram, bar the door," Iris pleaded, clinging to him. "We can wait. The sheriff. Mara, you can get the sheriff." "Avery is 2 hours away. Child, they will be here in 1, Mara said, her voice bleak. "You cannot fight 6 men. You must run. Take the horse. Take Lark. Ride north, to my cabin. They do not know where it is. I will try to lead them south." "No," Abram said again. His voice was final. He looked down at Iris. He put his hand on her stomach, over her hand. "They are not coming here." He turned to Mara. "Thank you. You have done more than enough. Go home. Be safe. This is not your fight." "It is all our fight, Abram," she said, her eyes flashing. "But I cannot stop you. God be with you." She turned and ran, her horse kicking up snow as she disappeared into the white curtain. Abram shut the door. He slid the bar. He turned to Iris. What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We have to hide. We have to—" "Listen to me, Iris," he said, and he took her by the shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding her. "Look at me." She met his gray eyes. They were not frightened. They were clear, cold, and utterly resolved. "They are not coming to this house," he said. "I will not let them bring their fire here. I will not have you, or Hope, in the middle of it. I will not have you hiding in a cellar while they try to burn the roof over our heads. I will not. That is not how this ends." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to end it," he said. "I am going to meet them, on my terms, on my land, but not my yard." "No," she cried, grabbing his shirt. "No, Abram, you cannot. They are 6. You are 1. It is death. Stay here. We will fight them. Together." "And what if we lose?" he said, his voice raw. "What happens to you? If they take me, what does Harlan do to you, no?" He thought of the pale, thin scars he had seen on her back one day, shaped like a strap. He thought of the way she still flinched if he moved too fast. He thought of her words. "Harlan always said I was broken, empty. He would die 1,000 times before he let that man touch her again." "This is not a fight," he said. "This is a cleansing." He pulled her to him. He kissed her. It was not the tender, reverent kiss of their new beginning. It was a hard, desperate kiss, a kiss of goodbye, a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and fear. He let her go. He grabbed his heavy coat, the shotgun, and a box of shells. He went to the wall and took down his rifle. "Stay here," he commanded. "Bar the door. Do not open it. For no one. Not until I come back. If you see anyone, fire the shotgun. Fire it twice. The sheriff will hear it. Someone will hear it." "Abram, please, "Bar the door, Iris." He was gone. She ran to the window. She watched him. A broad, dark figure moving not to the barn for Lark, but to the small corral for the heavy, gray draft horse, the one built for stamina, not speed. He saddled it, tied the shotgun to the saddle, and rode out, the rifle in his hand. He did not ride south, toward the Sumter place. He rode north, toward the thick, dark line of the pine forest. Iris slid the bar into place. Her hands were numb. She was alone. She went to the table, sat, and put her head in her hands, and she began to pray. Abram rode hard, the cold air burning his lungs. The snow was deep, but he knew this land. He knew the deer trails. He was not running. He was leading. He cut a wide circle, heading for the ridge that overlooked the Sumter place. He was going to make them see him. He was going to draw them out. He reached the ridge. He saw the chimney, a black stone tooth against the white. He saw the smoke. He saw the horses. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the air. A challenge. He saw them scatter. A moment later, he heard a yell. They had seen him. He did not wait. He wheeled the heavy horse and galloped back toward the pine forest. He had made the bait. Now they would chase. He heard them coming, 6 horses, crashing through the snow behind him. He pushed his horse into the trees. The forest was a different world. It was close, muffled, and dark. The snow was thinner here, the branches of the tall pines creating a dense canopy. He dismounted. Tying his horse to a low branch, he moved on foot, his rifle in his hand. He was a hunter, and this was his woods. He heard them enter the forest, loud and clumsy. "He's in here," it was Clyde's voice, high and thin. "Spread out, find him. He is one man." "Shut up, you fool!" a low, cold voice snapped. "Harlan Price. He wants us to spread out. He is trying to pick us off. Stay together. Find his horse." Abram smiled, a grim, cold expression. Harlan was smart, but Abram was smarter. He moved, silent as a shadow. Circling back, he found them, a dark knot of men, moving slowly, their eyes scanning the trees. He saw Harlan, a tall, gaunt man with a face like a hawk. He saw Clyde, huddled in his saddle, his face a ruin, and 4 others, hard-faced men with rifles. Abram raised his own rifle. He sighted on Harlan. This was the man, the root of the sickness. But as he put his finger on the trigger, a branch snapped behind him. One of the gunmen had circled wide. Abram dove. A rifle shot exploded, the bullet tearing through the bark where his head had been. Chaos. "There!" Clyde screamed. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the trees. Snow and bark sprayed the air. Abram rolled behind a massive pine, his heart hammering. He was pinned. He had to move. He took a breath, then another. He waited for a lull in the firing. He got it. He pushed off, running low, zigzagging between the trees. He saw one of the gunmen, the man who had shot at him, reloading. Abram did not hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The man crumpled into the snow. 1. He kept running. He needed a new position. He heard Clyde yelling, a sound of pure panic. "He's getting away. He is—" "Get him!" Harlan roared. "He is heading for the gully." Abram slid down a short, steep embankment. Landing in the frozen creek bed, he was exposed. He saw Clyde on the ridge above him. The man was not a fighter. He was fumbling with his rifle, his hands shaking, his broken jaw making him clumsy. He was crying, a wet, sloppy sound of terror. Abram raised his rifle. He did not feel rage. He did not feel pity. He felt nothing. He was just finishing a job. He fired. Clyde stiffened. He looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his chest. He made a small, surprised sound. And then he toppled forward, sliding down the embankment in a slow cascade of snow and loose rock. He landed face down in the frozen creek. 2. "Clyde!" Harlan screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. Abram was already moving, scrambling up the other side. As he reached the top, Harlan was there. He was fast. He raised his pistol. Abram fired, but Harlan fired at the same instant. A hot, searing, white-hot poker slammed into Abram's side. The force of it spun him around. He staggered, falling to one knee. He looked down. Dark, bright blood was already soaking his coat. He looked up. Harlan Price was gone. He heard the remaining gunmen crashing through the trees. They were scattering. Their leader was dead. Their paymaster was gone. They were done. Abram leaned against the pine, his rifle in his lap. The forest was silent again. He pressed his hand to his side. It was bad. He tried to stand. His legs would not hold him. "Iris," he whispered. He closed his eyes, the world spinning into a red and white fog. Harlan Price was not running. He was enraged. Clyde, his useless, talkative tool, was dead. But Harlan was a pragmatist. With Abram dead, as he assumed he was, the prize was still there. The girl, the farm. He rode hard, circling wide, avoiding the fight. He broke from the tree line, his eyes fixed on the small house, a curl of smoke rising from the chimney. He spurred his horse, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He did not see the men waiting on the road. "That is far enough. Price!" Harlan pulled his horse up. Sheriff Avery was there, his shotgun leveled. Behind him were 3 other men, Reverend Hollis, Dr. Wynne, and another farmer from the next ridge. All of them held rifles. "Sheriff," Harlan said, his voice slick, "I am glad you are here. That man Thorne, he just murdered my kin. I am here to—" "We heard the shooting, Price," Avery said, his voice like iron. "And we have got 2 of your hired guns. They scattered. They are talking a lot about you and Clyde and your papers." Harlan's face paled. "Your bluff is done," Avery said. "Get your hands up." Harlan snarled. He was a cornered rat. He grabbed for his pistol. Sheriff Avery's shotgun was louder. The blast tore Harlan's gun arm, spinning him from the saddle. He landed in a heap in the snow. "Doctor," Avery said, not taking his eyes off Harlan. "See to him. We are taking him in. For trial. Justice. Not just the hot-blooded justice of the forest, but the cold, slow justice of the community." Sheriff Avery looked at the forest. "Abram is still in there." They found him slumped against the pine. The snow around him was a terrible, dark red. "He is alive," Dr. Wynne yelled. We have to move him." "Not the farm," Avery said. "He will never make it. It is closer, and she is better at this." The sheriff rode to the farm. Iris, who had been standing at the window for an hour, her body rigid, saw him. He was alone. Her heart stopped. "Iris," he called. "He is alive. He is hurt, but he is alive. We are taking him to Mara Dunes." She did not wait. She tore the bar from the door and ran. She ran through the snow, her lungs burning, her feet numb. She ran, falling, rising, her only thought his name. She burst into Mara's small, herb-scented cabin. He was on the cot. He was as white as the snow, his eyes closed. Mara was working over him, her hands covered in blood and a dark herbal paste. "He is strong," Mara said, not looking up. "But the wound is deep. It went clean, but he has lost much blood." Iris fell to her knees beside the cot. This was her turn. This was her fight. She did not leave. For a day, and a night, and another day. She sat. She held his hand. It was cold. She washed his face. She spoke to him, her voice low, a constant, pleading murmur. "Come back, Abram. You cannot leave. Hope needs you. I need you. You are not alone. I am here. Come back." On the second night, the cabin was still. The only sound was the wind. Mara was asleep in her chair. Iris held his hand, her own head resting on the edge of the cot, her eyes heavy with an exhaustion she could not give in to. His fingers moved. She sat up, her heart stopping. His eyelids flickered. They opened. His eyes were cloudy, lost. Then they found her. They focused. He saw her. He saw her tear-streaked, terrified face. He tried to speak. His throat was dry. He swallowed, wincing. "Iris," he whispered. It was barely a sound. "I am here," she sobbed. "I am here, Abram." His hand, the one she was holding, tried to tighten. He whispered, his eyes closing for a moment, then opening again, fighting. "I am back." She buried her face in his hand, in the rough, calloused palm that had saved her, and she wept, a flood of silent, scalding tears. He was back. The ghosts were gone. The past was dead, buried in the snow, and the man she loved, the father of her child, was home. The recovery of Abram was a slow, stubborn thing. He lay on the cot in the small, herb-scented cabin belonging to Mara Dune, and he fought. He fought the fever. He fought the pain. And most of all, he fought the stillness. Iris never left his side. She was a small, quiet shadow, sleeping on a pallet by his cot, her hand never far from his. This was her part of the battle. It was not fought with guns, but with cool water, fresh bandages, and a low, constant murmur of encouragement. Love, she was learning, was also an act of grueling patience. Outside, the world was unfreezing. The great, oppressive white began to recede. The snow melted from the trees, then from the fields, then from the dark, disturbed earth under the cottonwood. The thaw came, a great, muddy, streaming release. The land was washing itself clean. Sheriff Avery rode out to the cabin, his horse splattering mud. He brought news. Harlan Price had not died. Dr. Wynne had patched his arm, and the sheriff had taken him, bound and sullen, to the county seat. From there, he had been sent downriver to a federal prison. His reign of malice and his false legal papers finished for good. The other gunmen had scattered, vanishing back into the territory they had come from. The war was over. Abram, hearing the news, had demanded to go home. Mara Doone had snorted, telling him he was too stubborn to die and too mean to rest. Dr. Annabel Shaw had ridden out, inspected the wound, and declared him a fool, but one who would likely live. The journey home was slow. Abram, pale and thin, leaned on Iris as he climbed into the wagon. The house was cold and still when they arrived, smelling of dust and stale air. But it was safe. The shotgun still hung by the door, but it was no longer a promise of violence. It was just a tool. The new, heavy bar on the door felt different. It was not to keep the world out. It was to keep their new, fragile life in. Iris was pregnant, her condition now a visible, gentle rounding beneath her dress. The baby, the small, secret hope, had grown while its father healed. Abram would look at her, his gaze lingering on her stomach, and a look of profound, protective awe would wash over his face. He had fought for a future he could not see, and here it was, living and breathing and growing right in front of him. One of the first days he was strong enough to walk the property. He went to the woodpile. Iris watched him from the porch. He took a piece of pine and his carving knife. He sat on the porch steps, the new spring sun warm on his back. He did not carve a horse or a rose. He carved a small, simple cross. When he was finished, he stood, his side aching, and walked, not to the fresh grave under the cottonwood, but to a spot near it. Iris followed, her hand resting on her stomach. He knelt, the damp earth cold on his knees. He used his knife to dig a small, deep hole. He held the cross for a moment. "This is for Mary," he said, his voice quiet, "and for the boy." He paused, his throat working. "And for the man for the man at the gate, for Clyde, for all of it." He placed the cross in the hole. He looked at Iris. "For the shame," he whispered, "and the fear, we bury it." She knelt beside him. Together, they pushed the soft, dark earth into the hole, covering the cross, burying the past, the ghosts, the price tags, and the fear. The cottonwood tree, once a monument to his grief, was now a guardian of their closure. Spring returned in a rush of green. The barley fields, the ones that had been there that first day, were a vibrant, shimmering sea. Life was not just returning, it was exploding, and with it came work. But it was not the frantic, fearful work of defense. It was the slow, hopeful work of building. Abram was still weak, but he worked. His first project was the cradle. He brought the smooth, pale pieces of pine into the main room. He assembled it with a slow, meticulous care, his large hands gentle. He placed it by the hearth, in the warm space where the fire now burned brightly every night. It was no longer a collection of parts. It was a bed. It was a promise. Iris had found a half-empty can of paint in the barn. It was white. She stood by the front door, the door that still bore the scar from the bullet, the door that had held the heavy bar against the world. "Abram," she said, "I was thinking—" He was sitting, mending a strap, the cradle rocking gently from a nudge of his boot. He looked up. "The door," she said, "it is so dark. Maybe we could paint it." He was still for a long moment. Mary. She had always wanted things painted. White. He had hated it. He had told her paint was dishonest. It peeled. It covered the real wood. He looked at the dark, scarred door. He looked at Iris, her face bright with the idea. He looked at the cradle. "Paint peels," he said, his voice rough. "But it is also clean," she said softly. Like the snow was a new start. He looked at her, at the life she had brought back into his dead house. He stood, took the can from her, and found a brush. "White," he said, prying the lid. "A clean start." He painted the door, The bright, clean white covered the scars, the old wood, the memory of the bar. He was letting the light in. He was accepting the new. The community, which had watched them with suspicion, now came with open hands. The violence had been a purge. The truth was known. Harlan and Clyde were gone. Abram and Iris remained. Sheriff Avery was the first. He did not come on business. He came on a Sunday, holding a small sack of sugar. "Just checking on the neighbors," he said, his eyes kind. He nodded to Abram, a deep gesture of respect, and he looked at Iris, who stood by the new white door. He touched the brim of his hat. "Mistress Thorne," he said. The name settled over her. A warm, protective cloak. The community had seen them and named them. Reverend Hollis came next. He brought a small Bible with a tooled leather cover. He stood in the main room, his eyes taking in the clean hearth, the cradle, the new white door. He smiled, a pure, gentle smile. He blessed the house. He blessed the cradle. He looked at Iris, her time near, life. He said, his voice full. He looked at Iris, her time near, life. He said, his voice full of wonder. "It is a stubborn, stubborn grace." Even Dr. Annabelle Shaw rode out, her black bag tied to her saddle. She came to check on her patient. She examined Iris, declared her strong and healthy, and then turned a stern eye on Abram, poking his healing side. "You are a fool, Abram Thorne," she said, her voice sharp. "But you are a lucky one. Mara and I, we expect an invitation to the christening." The world had turned. The small, isolated farm was no longer an island. It was part of a shore. The time came on a warm night in late spring. The air was soft, smelling of new grass and damp earth. It started gently, a low ache in the small of her back. By midnight, it was real. "Abram," she whispered, her voice tight with a pain that was entirely new. He was awake in an instant. The fear in his eyes was a different kind, a pure male terror of helplessness. He did not wait. He ran to the barn, saddled Lark, and rode like the wind. First to Mara's cabin, then to town, to fetch Mistress Gable, the midwife, a wide-hipped, no-nonsense woman who had delivered half the county. They returned in a clatter of hooves. The two women took over the house, their voices low and calm. They sent Abram out. "Boil water," Mistress Gable commanded, shooing him from the bedroom door, "and keep it boiling." The labor was long. Iris was strong, but it was a hard fight. Through the closed door, Abram could hear her, her low moans, her sharp, pained cries. He paced the main room, from the white door to the cold hearth, his hands clenched, his healing side a dull, forgotten ache. The sun came up. The day wore on. He was useless. Late in the afternoon, Mara came out. Her face was grim. "The child is turned wrong," she said, her voice low. "It is coming slow. And Iris, she is tiring. We need more heat. The room is cold." Iris cried out, a high, thin sound of despair. "We need the cook stove," Mara said. "That hearth is not enough. We need a real fire. Now, Abram, we need it hot." Abram froze. "The cook stove, the fire, the heat." He looked at the black iron box. He smelled the smoke, the burning. He was back in the old house, the flames, the screaming. Abram Iris shrieked his name. It was not a cry, it was a plea. He looked at the stove. He looked at the closed door. His new life was behind that door. His wife, his child. His old ghosts were in the fire. He made his choice. His new love was stronger than his old trauma. He strode to the woodpile. His hands were shaking. He grabbed an armload of kindling. He did not go to the hearth. He went to the cook stove. He laid the wood. He struck a match. He watched the small, hungry flame lick the kindling. This was not a fire of destruction. This was a fire for life, a fire for boiling water, a fire for warmth. He choked back a sob, not of grief, but of release. He had faced the fire, and he had not flinched. He added more wood. The fire roared, a sound of life. He kept the kettle boiling. The end came just as the sun was setting. He was standing by the stove, his face grim. When the sounds from the bedroom stopped, the silence was terrible, a deafening, hollow void. And then he heard it. It was not a cry, it was a wail, a thin, reedy, furious, beautiful wail. The door opened. Mistress Gable stood there, her sleeves rolled up, her face exhausted, but triumphant. "You have a daughter, Abram Thorne," she said, a wide smile splitting her face. "A healthy, loud, beautiful daughter." He stumbled into the room. It was hot, steamy, and smelled of life. Iris was lying on the bed. She was pale, drenched, her hair plastered to her face, but she was smiling. She was laughing, her face wet with tears, laughter through tears. Mara was at the basin, washing the child. She brought the small, squirming, red bundle to him. "She is perfect," Mara whispered. Abram reached out, his large, rough, scarred hands, the hands that had taken a life and built a cradle, trembled as he took his daughter. "She was so small, so alive." He looked down at the tiny, furious face. He looked at Iris, his wife, who was watching him, her eyes shining with a love so deep it took his breath away. "Hope," he whispered, his voice thick. He carried the baby to the bed and sat, his arm going around Iris, pulling her close. The room was quiet, save for the small, snuffing sounds of the new life. A few weeks later, the rhythm of the house had found its new, gentle cadence, the sound of the cradle rocking, a steady, peaceful creak, creak, creak. Abram, sitting at the table mending a strap, rocked it with his boot. Lark, the pale palomino, stood in the yard, her head over the fence, as if she were a guardian, a quiet sentinel for the new life she had, in her own way, brought to the farm. The sun was setting. The light was pure, golden honey, pouring over the green barley fields. Abram and Iris sat on the porch, on the bench he had built. The white door was open. In the cradle beside them, Hope made a sound. It was not a cry. It was a small, gurgling, contented noise, a laugh. It was the first one. The sound, small and bright, echoed in the quiet evening. It traveled across the yard, past the painted door, toward the cottonwood tree that now stood for peace. Abram reached out, his large hand covering hers. They did not speak. They just sat and watched the sun go down. The summer that followed was a long, warm, gentle breath. The world, which had been a canvas of brutal white snow and dark, violent blood, had been repainted in the deepest greens and golds. The barley grew tall, its heads heavy and thick, promising a harvest that would fill their repaired barn. The air, which had once rung with the echo of gunshots, was now filled with the lazy drone of bees in the small patch of wildflowers Iris had planted by the porch steps. Life, which had been a thing of sharp edges and daily survival, softened. It found a new rhythm. It was a rhythm measured not in fear, but in simple, profound increments. The creak, creak, creak of the cradle that Abram rocked with his boot as he sat at the table, mending a bridle. The soft, bubbling sound of the stew on the cook stove, the one he had lit without hesitation every single day since his daughter's birth. The quiet, snuffling breaths of Hope, asleep in a sling against Iris's chest as she hung laundry on the line. Abram's wound had healed, leaving a puckered, angry scar on his side, a physical reminder of the price he had paid. But the man himself had changed. The ghosts had not vanished, but they had retreated. They no longer sat at his table or stood by his bed. He still visited the cottonwood tree, but he no longer stood there in a vigil of grief. He would stand by the small, simple cross he had planted. His daughter balanced on his hip, and he would tell her about the wind. He would point out the hawk circling above. He was teaching her about the land, his land, Her land. The past was no longer a locked room. It was just a story, a part of the soil. He worked with a new purpose. The fear was gone, and in its place was a deep, quiet resolve. He finished the irrigation ditch he had started, a long, neat channel of dark earth that brought water from the creek to a new field. He was planting for the future, for a mouth he had never expected to feed. He had traded for 2 new cows, and he spoke of building a larger herd. His love was not in his words, but in his labor. It was in the solid new fence post, the repaired roof, the steady provision of a man building a home. Iris, too, had settled into herself, the old, haunted look in her eyes, the posture of a girl expecting a blow, was gone. She moved with a quiet confidence. Her body, which had once been a source of shame and pain, was now a source of life. She was a mother. She was a partner. She was, as Sheriff Avery had named her, Mistress Thorne. And the name fit. The community, which had once been a source of suspicion, was now a source of support. Reverend Hollis and his wife had come by, bringing a small, hand-stitched quilt for hope. Dr. Annabelle Shaw had visited again, not as a physician, but as a friend, and had pronounced both mother and child to be thriving. Even Sheriff Avery would stop, not in pursuit of trouble, but just to rest his horse and pass the time. He sat on their porch one hot July afternoon, accepting a cup of cool water from Iris. He looked different, more relaxed. The county was quiet. Harlan Price was a distant memory, locked away. The rule of law, once so thin, had been solidified by the community's choice to stand together. "It is good to see, Abram," Avery said, gesturing with his cup to the newly dug ditch. "Good to see you building." "It is a good year for it," Abram replied, his voice quiet. He bounced hope on his knee. "It is," Avery agreed. He looked at Iris, a deep, respectful nod. "This house, it feels different. It feels like a home." "It is," Iris said, her voice clear, her hand resting on Abram's shoulder. When the sheriff had ridden on, they sat together on the porch, watching the day begin to cool. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft purple. The heat was lifting, and a gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of warm pine and cut hay. Hope was asleep in her cradle, her small face serene. Lark, the pale palomino, stood at the fence line, a quiet, watchful guardian. Iris leaned her head against Abram's shoulder. His arm came around her, pulling her close. They sat in the comfortable silence they had built, a silence no longer empty, but full of shared understanding. "She is a beautiful child," Iris whispered, her eyes on the cradle. "She looks like you. She has your steady eyes." Abram grunted, a soft sound of contentment. "She has your spirit. Iris, she is a fighter, like her mother." They watched the fields, the barley, golden and ripe, rippled in the breeze. It was the same field she had seen when she first arrived. A scared, silent girl in the back of Clyde Merrin's wagon. It seemed a lifetime ago. Another world, another person. She reached up and touched the small, wooden rose he had carved for her. She still wore it, every day, a secret charm against her skin. "Abram," she said, her voice soft, reflective. "I was standing here, right here, the day I arrived. I looked at that field. I thought my life was over. I thought I was nothing." He turned his head, his rough cheek brushing her hair. "I was 19 years old," she said, her voice a near whisper, not in shame, but in wonder. "And I was traded for a horse." She said it aloud, the truth, the ugly, hard fact of her beginning. She said it in this new, safe world, and the words had lost their power to wound her. They were just words. Abram was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the fields, at the land he had bled for, at the home he had built from the ashes. His arm tightened around her. "It was the smartest trade I ever made in my life," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. Iris pulled back, looking up at him, her eyes wide. He met her gaze, his own gray eyes clear and full of a love that was as steady as the earth beneath them. "Because," he said, a small, rare smile touching his lips, "it taught me something. It taught me how to treat someone like gold." She did not need to cry. She just smiled, a slow, radiant smile that matched his. She leaned her head back on his shoulder. Femme Gia, dignity. It was not something that could be bought or sold. It was something that was given. It was something that was earned. It was something that was built. Every day. In small, true, steady actions. Their family was not a contract, not a paper signed by a judge. It was this, a choice, made every morning when the sun came up, to stand together, a choice to protect, to provide, to heal. "What will we tell her?" Iris asked, her gaze drifting back to the cradle. "When she is old enough, what will we tell Hope about? About Clyde? About Harlan?" Abram was silent for a time. He looked up at the cottonwood tree. Its leaves were whispering in the evening wind. It was the sound of 1,000 memories. It had seen the fire. It had seen the burials. It had seen the first snow. And now, it heard the soft cooing of a baby in a cradle, the quiet murmur of her parents on the porch. The tree remembered everything, and that was all right. "We will tell her the truth," Abram said, his voice firm. "We will not. We will not fill her head with the darkness, but we will not lie. We will tell her that she came from people who were lost, but she was found. We will tell her that she was born in a house that was sad, but she brought it joy. We will tell her that she was born of a great love, a love that fought for her. The truth. The truth is not a shadow, Iris. It is a light. It is what shows us where we came from and why we are strong." The first stars were appearing in the deep, velvet sky. The air was cool and sweet. From inside the house, the hearth, the one he had rebuilt, the one he had lit to bring his daughter into the world, crackled. It was not an enemy. It was not a ghost. It was just a fire. It was warmth. It was safety. Abram gasped. He looked down at Iris. He looked at the life they had made. He thought of the girl in the back of the wagon. He thought of the woman beside him. What is bought and sold can fall into the wrong hands. What is loved becomes home. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please comment below so we can all connect and share. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel Wild West Night. Like this video, and give us even more support by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.